Before I begin this story, I would like to mention that yes, this story is 100% true, and I have only told a few people I am very close to. I want to start out with that because the events that took place almost seem as if they were taken from a movie, but they weren't. When I read most stories on here, I'm not much of a fan of backstories, but to fully grasp this story, I do have to go back a little bit. At the time, I was 17 years old and working a part-time job at a local movie theater. I absolutely loved working there. The managers were really laid back and the employees were super fun to work with. Me and two of my favorite ushers, people cleaning theaters, all worked the same shift from 5:30 to 10:15. Except I was the closer, so I was to stay at work until 1 a.m. when all the movies ended and everybody left. Well, when we came in, there was an ambulance and a big part of our lobby roped off, and we all sat upstairs waiting to clock in, wondering what had happened. When we clocked in and got downstairs, we talked to somebody who had been working the whole day, and they told us that a man had died earlier that day due to what we believed was a heart attack. That whole event actually terrified us but left us curious. Deaths in our area like that weren't common, so it was somewhat disturbing. Now this happened around the time a movie called CO.AG was coming out. The coincidence that this happened was horrible because one of my good friends had the idea of going to his house after work and bringing the Ouija board in to see if we could contact this man who had just died. At first, I decided there was no way I would play with it. Due to my religious beliefs, I knew that if we did play with the board, we could get into some horrible stuff. Yet I decided that we could just try it out, and if things got bad, we would end it quick. This is where things would take a quick turn. My buddy left and got the board. The managers usually sit in an office downstairs chatting and doing their closing routines. I rushed through mine that night so we could see what we could find out. From the start, I should have known to stop playing with this horrible thing, but I never realized it. When we started, we couldn't get an answer. My buddy kept asking and asking, but as soon as I spoke, the piece moved. I asked a question like what my name was just to see if it would move, and it worked. Now I thought it was my buddies messing with me. I asked what the name of my girlfriend at the time was, and it answered correctly. Then before I could speak, it gave off the name of a guy. At the time it didn't make sense, but months later it was the name of a guy my girlfriend was cheating on me with. But at the time I didn't know the meaning of the name. We went on, and eventually after enough personal questions, I realized it wasn't my buddies. Things only got worse. We started asking about the man who died there, and the board answered our questions. Towards the end of our questioning, the board began to act strange. Long story short, we soon found out we hadn't gotten a hold of the man who had died. Instead, we got in touch with a demon. And the most haunting part about this was that the demon only answered to me. It had a specific liking to me. Before we were able to finish, we heard a manager walking up the stairs and quickly hit the board, and my two buddies hit as well. The manager came up but didn't notice anything, and it was nothing for us to sit up in the stairs. As soon as the manager left, my buddies bailed, saying they were too scared, and as was I. We had only forgotten one crucial part of an Ouija board experience. We forgot to say goodbye. I never realized it until the next day, but I did know all the rules to an Ouija board. The next day is when things got bad for me. Again, this is all true, and it's the worst experience I've had in my entire life. The next day was a Friday night, and my parents had left to go out of town for a softball tournament with my sister. I hadn't thought any more on last night since nothing had been added on top of it. Around 5 o'clock, I was sitting in my living room watching The Office, easily one of my favorite TV shows of all time, when out of nowhere the mood and feeling in my house changed. About as soon as I looked up, I witnessed a chair from my kitchen thrown across the room. I was in an absolute panic. I ran out of my house, grabbing my keys and wallet sitting by the door, and went to my car, driving off. I went to the Walmart closest to my house since it was a public place and I could gain my composure. After about half an hour of walking around, I decided to get whatever was following me out of my house and out of my life. I spent the next hour and a half at a Starbucks, researching all the things I could. Luckily, at my local mall was a game store that sold Ouija boards. So I bought one. Now, I know playing with one alone is bad, but I had contacted my buddies to see if anything strange happened to them. But they didn't have anything happen, so I decided it was just me the demon wanted to talk to, and nobody else. So I took this back to my house with the intention of ending it there. A lot happened while I was playing around with the Ouija board, and I spent probably about 45 minutes talking to the demon who was now living with me. I talked back and forth with this demon, and due to my religious background, I refused to give up against it. At one point it said, "Sell soul," but I refused to do that. I said prayers in my house calling out to God to end it. Towards the end, there was silence on the board. I took my hands off the piece to Google what silence meant during an Ouija board session, to see if I had gotten rid of the demon or what. About as soon as I took my hand off that piece, it flew straight to goodbye. I knew then that my mission was done, so I cut the board into 7 pieces and buried it outside my house. My parents don't know of this, and hardly anybody I know actually knows this story, but I felt like it could be shared here. Feel free to ask questions. So I'm from a small country town and grew up in a Baptist church. I learned about angels and demons just like everyone else who went to Sunday school. My parents told me that there are no such things as ghosts or ghouls. It is just demons tricking you. My mother's family had many stories that I grew up hearing. They would tell me all these crazy and extremely unbelievable stories of seeing creatures or dead loved ones. I never really believed them, just thought they were playing a joke on me. Well, I grew up and didn't experience anything myself, other than the random noises you hear from outside at night, living in the woods. My sisters and I would scare each other, describing the monsters that were coming to get us. They would gang up on me since I was the only boy. Once I graduated high school, I left for college. It didn't work out where I was and decided to change schools to one closer to home. I moved back in with my parents to save for tuition. My dad and I built a 2-car garage when I was younger. He later built an office in it for his business, but he moved it into my old room once I left, since it was closer. So when I came back, the only way I could convince myself that I was not a failure and crawled home to Mommy and Daddy was to move into the office in the garage. It wasn't that bad, except the garage was separate from the house and bathroom by about 200 feet, and there was no heating and air. I bought a heater to stay warm, but it barely worked. I was usually freezing every night before going to bed. One night I was watching television before bed, and I had just gotten the room to get warm by covering the door and windows with blankets. I was nice and toasty and tired. I was training to go into the military to pay for college, but then all of a sudden the temperature dropped. Frustrated, I get out of my cocoon of blankets to check the heater. That is when it happened. That's when I learned that my family had not been messing with me my whole life. I felt sick. I had that feeling like something was right behind me. No matter how many times I turned, I could not catch it, but I could feel it in the corner of my eye. Terrified, I shouted, "Hello!" Maybe someone had come in the garage without me knowing. No answer. My stomach sank, and I could feel every hair on my body stand up. I was petrified. I could not move and barely think. Then I remembered something that I was brought up to believe. When you are facing something unholy, just shout, "In the name of God, I command you to leave." So I did. My voice cracked as the air disappeared from my lungs. I took another breath and shouted it again. "In the name of God, I command you to leave." Just then, I was standing in the middle of the room and I felt a scalding heat wave rush around the room and then shoot straight through me. I wish I could find the words to explain the exact feeling of that passing through me. The closet I had come to hate. It happened in a split second but felt like minutes. I felt hatred like I never felt before. I consider myself to be a nice, easygoing guy. Usually, turn the other cheek kind of guy. However, in that moment, it was like if the whole world was burning and everyone in it was dying a horrific death. I would be happy and loving it. I never wanted to see and speak to anyone ever again. I hated everything. And just like that, it was gone. My body felt like it was in a microwave, hot on the inside and freezing on the outside. My legs gave out and I crashed to the floor, crying harder than I had ever cried in my entire life. I wanted to throw up but could not. I just was there. If you've ever had a boss, teacher, or parent scold you, and then watch over you, then you somewhat know what I was feeling. It took me about 20 minutes to get my legs to work again. I walked into the house where my family was watching a movie, and I just sat at the dining room table crying. This freaked them out since they had not seen me cry since I severely broke my leg when I was young. My mom asked what happened and really freaked out when she saw my hand. I didn't even realize that I had grabbed a wooden cross I carved when I was in Boy Scouts. I was holding it like it was my lifeline. In a way, it was. The only words I could get through were, "Stay out of the garage." Then I finally threw up. I found out the next day that my mom and sister went out there and blessed the room and called our pater to come bless the room, but the damage was done. I now have seen behind the curtain. I got my things and moved back into my old room, where my dad's office had moved to. He just moved his stuff into my sister's room since she moved out. No one went into that room again until the last day my parents were there. The moving truck was packed, and we were 10 minutes from leaving the house I grew up in, for good. I looked into that room. It's hard to explain, but I could feel the room laughing. It still haunts me to this day. My oldest sister later revealed that not long after we built the garage, that her and her friends played with an Ouija board in it. They had a slumber party and a friend brought one over. My parents never allowed one to come near the house before. I yelled at her for a while. One day I plan to go back and visit to see if the feelings are still there. Personally, I hope it burns to the ground or is swept away in a hurricane. I now bless every house I move into before I move in. Haven't had a problem since though. Sorry for the lengthy telling of this. This is the first time I've told this story outside of my family, few friends, and one ex-girlfriend. I was tired of people looking at me like I was crazy. I don't care if you believe my story. This was not to prove that demons exist. This was just my experience with them. The sad thing is my story is probably the most tame of all of my family's stories. So this happened over a year ago. I live with my family, which includes my 2 younger sisters. That night, a friend of theirs was sleeping over and I didn't want them to bother me, so I remember closing my door for the night and locking it. I normally leave it slightly open. I also got my doorknob changed months prior because my sisters tend to go into my room and take my stuff. So I had the only key to my room that I kept with me at all times. I woke up in the middle of the night because I felt my blanket being pulled. I didn't think anything of it at first. I thought maybe I did it or something. I don't know why I overlooked it. It was being pulled from the right corner. I pulled my blanket back up and went back to sleep. I don't know how much time passed, but I woke up again because I felt my blanket once again being pulled. It stopped when I woke up. I slightly sat up but stopped because I realized I did not want to see what was pulling my blanket. I wasn't scared though, even though normally I would be. For example, the heart dropping feeling. I was somewhat awake at that point and realized something was wrong, but I was calm. I wasn't even tired. I just knew I had to sleep. It's weird. When I look back at it, my room was my room, but it was different. It had a strange glow to it. Anyways, I just went back to sleep without my blanket. I turned to face the wall and went to sleep. I decided it was best to ignore whatever it was. I awoke once more later that night because the hallway light was hitting my eyes. I squint and look up to see my door wide open and the hallway light on, which is always on at night, and a tall, dark figure standing there, laughing. I didn't even hear anything actually. It was moving its head back and forth, like when a person laughs. I just remember kind of being like, yeah, I don't have time for this shit, and closed my eyes and went back to sleep. The next morning I woke up and left my room, which included me unlocking my door to get out. I asked my sisters and their friend and almost interrogated them. They swore it wasn't them. We aren't that religious anymore, but we take stuff like this seriously and know to own up to it if it was a prank. My sisters loved me very much and saw how scared I was and still said they didn't do it. I know I was not dreaming. I definitely know it. I was awoken from a dream I was having and I remember feeling annoyed by the cold air hitting my legs. As a side note, my room used to be my sister's old room, where she went through the edgy I love Satan phase and played the Ouija board and did weird shit in it. We once found a paper under her bed saying the following: "This caused scary shit to happen in the house in the span of a year." I'm a real estate agent and I was assisting another realtor walking through a very old farm home, at least 100 years old, but I would guess older than that, trying to figure out a good market value of the property. So we walked around the outside of the property, going in and out of barns, checking everything out. It was a cold, rainy day and everything felt fine but eerie. I brushed it off as being a cold, weird feeling day, and we made our way inside. We entered through the back door into the kitchen and everything was normal. Old looking, needing updating cosmetically, but nothing out of the norm for a home as old as it was. Plaster walls, thin old windows, drafty, etc. We walked through all the rooms on the first floor. Nothing's odd yet. I walk past a door and say, "What's in there?" Realtor J says, "I don't know. Open it." I approached the door and opened it, and it was the basement. Well, let's see the rest first, then we'll go down there. So we do. We go to the second floor and I get a feeling like I'm being followed or watched as I'm climbing the stairs. I stop to feel the old plaster walls and point out that they're cracked and needing repair. I point out some other things that will devalue the property and start talking, saying someone will have to put a lot of hard work into the place. Then I start to feel like I pissed something off by talking shit about the house. Realtor Jay was commenting about how he felt odd too on the second floor. Whatever, we continued checking things out, opening doors and closets. When I open a short door and see a staircase leading up to a big giant open attic, I say, "Hey, let's check this out." Jay says, "Alright." Kinda weirdly. I love old homes with all their secrets they have, hidden rooms, etc. We walk up these narrow, high step stairs, almost like a slanted ladder more than stairs, into a large, finished attic. When I say finished, I mean there's a floor over the joists. There isn't a ceiling just open and exposed, but there are some windows, and some toys and stuff up there. Pretty neat, I'm thinking. Parents used to have their kids play up here, I'm guessing, Jay says. Towards the backside of the attic, there's a small, very dark room. So obviously I go check it out, and it's a very small bathroom with a little tub. And past that, there's another very dark, windowless room. I go into the bathroom, and as soon as I cross over the threshold, I feel scared shitless. And totally for no reason. I went to stop what I'm doing and get out of there. I say to Jay, "What the fuck is this shit? There's a room past this weird bathroom." Jay says don't go in there. I say why, even though I knew why, because it was creepy. I turn around, shut the bathroom, and just feel so negative, and like I was in something's space and was not welcome, like it was their territory and they had it with us in their space. We quickly decide to leave and make our way to the staircase, but we were hurriedly doing so. Jay makes his way first, and because of how the stairs are, one person nearly has to be on the second floor before the next person can start down the stairs. I'm saying, "Go, go, go," to Jay, and he tries his best to hurry. I make it to about the third step when I hear hiss, like a big snake or something hissing at me right behind me, like so close. I literally screamed. I said, "Did you fucking hear that?" and jumped down the rest of the stairs onto the second floor. We shut the door and hear 7 or 8 big footsteps from the staircase upstairs to the center of the attic, like someone wearing big boots, unmistakable footsteps. Shocked, we just stood there and looked at each other. There was not anyone in the house. We know this, we just walked through all of it. We make our way down the stairs to the first floor, and I'm shaking all jumbled up and said, "It chased me, it didn't want us in there." And Jay said, "Did it push you down the stairs or did you jump?" I said I did not know. I didn't remember feeling pushed, but I definitely landed hard on the second floor. We make our way around the stairs to the basement, and Jay says no. "We are not going down there. Let's lock up and leave." The buyers of the home contacted us and told us they love the home, but the kids have stopped playing in the attic. They refuse to go up there. This is all a real true experience. I've always wanted to go back and check it out again, but have not got the opportunity, and don't think it'd be right to ask the current homeowners if I could snoop around. I have felt weird things in homes before. I have been in a lot of homes, but this was the most direct and terrifying experience I have ever felt. I've definitely never been hissed at like that either. I forgot to mention a weird thing. The room past the bathroom in the attic, the super creepy one, had a lock on the outside of it. Like you could lock someone or something in the room. It was also a small door. Like I would have had to bend over and get down to enter the room. The bathroom had an outside lock on it as well. Like you could either lock the room from the outside, or you could lock the bathroom from the outside. The attic door from the second floor leading up to the attic had a lock on it as well, so you could lock whatever you wanted in that attic from the second floor. My grandfather was born in 1939 in a small country town in the North Carolina mountains. He was one of the youngest in a very large family. His parents weren't the wealthiest. There wasn't enough bedrooms for everyone. So my grandpa slept on a small cot in the hallway. The cot was across from his parents' room. He would get into trouble for getting out of bed all the time, since the springs would squeak very loudly. His dad would threaten to punish him with a belt if he was caught again getting out of bed. While at the other end of the hall was the back door. It had a window in it with curtains. The backyard had a fence at the back, separating neighborhoods. There were no fences separating the yards next to them. My grandpa would hear noises at night and go look to see what it was. That is why his dad threatened him. His dad worked long hours and had no time for jokes or pranks. One night in the middle of winter, my grandpa could hear something scratching at the door. He looked up, but just moving his head made his bed squeak, and he didn't want to get in trouble. So he laid still. The scratching stopped. The next day he told his mom about it and even looked at the door and saw tiny scratches. His mom just played it up to kids being kids and told him to drop it, because if his father hears about it, he will get angry. He pouted but dropped it. Nothing happened for a week or two. Then another really cold night, and he could hear the tapping on the door now. He was sure it was a raccoon or a possum. He got up because he was sure it would get in the small garden they had, and his dad would be more mad over that than him getting out of bed. He went to the back door and opened the curtains, expecting to see nothing until he looked down. He was wrong. There was a lady staring back at him. When I was a kid hearing this story for the first time, he explained her as so pale that she was glowing. Her red hair was radiating due to the street light behind her. It made her look like her hair was burning. She wore a white summer dress like she was going to a picnic. He screamed, which woke everyone in the house. He could hear them all getting out of bed. She smiled at him and began walking away when his dad came out yelling about the hour and how long he has until work the next day. My grandpa pulled him to the door and told him what happened. His dad was not having any of it. He grabbed the mop and began hitting my grandpa over and over. Everyone else went back to their room. My grandpa went to bed crying, but couldn't sleep from the pain. Life went back to normal for a while. It wasn't until the summer that they had another visit. As usual, my grandpa was in his bed. This time he heard a firm knock on the door. It scared him and he jumped out of bed thinking it was a burglar. There were a lot of attempted break-ins recently. He opened the curtains to see that woman. He stood his ground this time. He asked, "Who are you?" Quietly, she smiled and said, "Let me in." Her skin was less pale this time, but her hair seemed to be glowing more. He asked more confidently, "Who are you?" Her smile disappeared. She moved closer to the door and said louder, "Let me in." He was scared out of his mind. Keep in mind he was still only 9. He kept his eyes on her and yelled for his dad. There was a loud noise from the bedroom where his dad was holding a shotgun because of the break-ins. The woman was now basically against the door and raised both of her clenched fists, loudly banged the door and screamed, "Let me in!" My grandpa swears her eyes were slightly glowing red to match her illuminated hair. He said she looked like she was about to burst into flames. His dad pointed the gun at the door and demanded to know who she was and what she wanted. She started beating on the door over and over. Everyone in the family but his dad ran into the other room. Suddenly the noises stopped. His dad wouldn't tell them what happened. He just yelled at them to go back to bed. It wasn't until years later, in his very old age, he told my grandpa that the woman just dissolved into smoke in front of him. He was too scared to tell anyone he saw because of his cousin, who was just recently put into a mental institution for shell shock, PTSD from World War II. My grandpa was allowed to move the cot in his parents' room for a while. My grandpa used to tell me so many stories growing up, but he didn't share this one until I was 9. He said he wanted me to be the same age as him, so I would know somewhat how he felt. I thought these were just scary stories. I wish he was still alive and I could tell him that I really believe him now. I hope you also enjoy this story.